Director Patel, welcome.
Thank you, sir.
When you were here for your confirmation, we talked about your so-called enemies list. It appears to me that there have been adverse actions of various kinds taken against about 20 of the 60 people on your enemies list. You've been in office for 7 months. At that rate, you've got 14 months until you've hit all 60. Can you explain that?
Again, that is an entirely inaccurate presupposition. I do not have an enemies list. You can continue to characterize it as you wish. The only actions we take, generally speaking, for personnel at the FBI are ones based on merit and qualification and your ability to uphold your constitutional duty. You fall short, you don't work there anymore.
All right, team. Dr. John back behind the mic. A dramatic courtroom scene, FBI director frozen, judge issuing an arrest threat sounds like a legal thriller. But the reality is far less cinematic, and the viral version of the moment is unreliable. None of the dramatic courtroom showdown judge threatening arrest, FBI director frozen ever happened. Yet, millions believe it did. Because viral fiction travels faster than the truth. The real story is more nuanced than the fiction that spread. Let me paint you a picture of what's really going on here. Because this is one of those situations where the real story is genuinely newsworthy, but it's been completely overshadowed by a fictional narrative that's way more sensational. Think about what it would actually mean if a federal judge threatened to arrest the sitting FBI director.
Well, there was a list. You don't like it to be called an enemies list, and it had about 60 names, and about 20 have had an adverse action. So those are, I think, pretty clear facts. Let me move on to your grand jury testimony, which we also talked about when you were here. I think you indicated that you understood that a witness in the grand jury is free to discuss afterwards whatever they told the grand jury. And you then went on to suggest, saying, I can't go into court orders granted by the D.C. District Chief Judge, and you want me to violate a court order. In those remarks, you fairly plainly suggested that there was a court order of some kind that somehow restricted or limited your ability to discuss your own testimony to that grand jury.
Think about the constitutional crisis that would create. Think about the separation of powers nightmare that would unfold. Think about every news organization in the world descending on that courthouse to cover the story. None of that happened because none of that is real. But the actual events that did happen are significant in their own right. They involve the FBI director making a major announcement and then, for reasons that remain unclear, deleting that announcement entirely. That's a real story. That's something that actually happened and deserves examination. But somewhere along the way, the truth got twisted into something completely unrecognizable. Here's where things get really interesting.
Since then, that chief judge that you mentioned, Judge Boasberg, has written, and I'm quoting him here, Federal Rule of Criminal Procedure 6E allows witnesses like Patel to divulge the contents of their testimony, meaning that nothing was preventing him from doing so before the committee. Can we confirm here today that there is no court order of any kind that limits your ability as a witness before the grand jury to discuss your own testimony to that grand jury?
We can confirm that pursuant to my action that that grand jury testimony has been released, the transcript.
That's, in what forum was it released, may I ask?
Publicly.
Okay, we'll check on that. The FBI does background investigations. In the case of a U.S. attorney, Janine Pirro, it has come to light that in a civil proceeding,
The false narrative that's been circulating online doesn't just get the details wrong. It gets the entire story backward. It reverses the roles completely. It takes what actually happened and flips it into its exact opposite. And once you understand what really took place, you'll see just how thoroughly this misinformation has distorted reality. The actual sequence of events is straightforward. A judge was arrested and the FBI director announced it. But the fake version of events claims the exact reverse, that judges were threatening to arrest the FBI director. It's like looking at a photograph and then looking at its negative. Everything is inverted, everything is opposite. And yet, somehow, the inverted version is the one that's gone viral. So what really happened?
That Fox News executives, prior to her confirmation, called her, I'm quoting here, a reckless maniac who makes, quote, insane comments, and said, I don't trust her to be responsible, and noted her penchant for what they called random conspiracy theories on weird internet sites. My question to you is, did that turn up in her background investigation?
For any background investigation, Senator, we do not discuss those publicly. And for every background investigation, when there's an adjudication, it is not made by me. It is made by the career professionals who run the inspection division and background check system.
Do you know if that information was found? You see, we're an oversight body here, and there are really three possibilities here. One is that the FBI background investigation didn't find that stuff. That's worth noting because these investigations, full field background investigations, are supposed to find that stuff. That's possibility one. Possibility two is that the FBI did in fact find that information and then did not report it.
Let's walk through it carefully, because this matters. The FBI director posted something on social media, something significant, something that would normally be major news. He announced that the FBI had arrested a federal judge, a judge from Milwaukee County to be specific. He made this announcement publicly. He used his platform as the head of the FBI to inform the world that a judge had been taken into custody on obstruction allegations. That's a big deal. That's the kind of announcement that would normally generate immediate coverage and intense scrutiny. But then something happened. Something that raised even more questions than the announcement itself. He deleted the post. He took it down. The announcement disappeared from social media as quickly as it had appeared. And suddenly, everyone was asking the same question.
To the administration or to the committee. And the third is that you found it, you reported it to the administration, and they went ahead with her nomination, knowing that she had been described as a reckless maniac who made insane comments, who wasn't trusted by colleagues to be responsible, and who had a penchant for random conspiracy theories on weird internet sites. Are you saying that this committee does not have any authority or reason to look into which of those things is true?
This committee can look into anything it wishes. I'm telling you that the background investigations that are done by the HRD division are done by career individuals. They do not report the details of those to me. They adjudicate those independently and individually. That's how it's always been done.
What happened during the pause of FBI background investigations that was alleged in the complaint against you and the FBI by the FBI agents who were terminated? On February 12th, Emil Bovee directed the FBI, quote, to pause any FBI background investigations of Trump nominees until Patel was confirmed, which happened on February 20th, is the general description of what they alleged. Why, do you know, were background investigations paused?
Why? Why announce it at all if you're just going to delete it? What changed between the announcement and the deletion? What made him decide that this information shouldn't be public after all? Those are legitimate questions. Those are the questions that journalists should be asking. Those are the questions that create a real news story worth investigating. But instead of focusing on those questions, the internet went in a completely different direction. The internet took this real event, this actual sequence of actions, and created an entirely fictional scenario that bore almost no resemblance to what actually happened. The internet decided that instead of the FBI director announcing a judge's arrest, it would be much more dramatic if judges were threatening to arrest the FBI director. And once that fictional narrative took hold, it spread like wildfire. Video creators started producing content based on this false premise. They invented specific details. They named specific judges. They described specific courtroom confrontations that never occurred. And people ate it up because it was just so much more exciting than the real story. Now let's talk about these fabricated videos, because they're genuinely impressive in their creativity, even if they're completely dishonest. The creators of these videos didn't just make vague claims about judges threatening arrest. They built entire detailed scenarios. They named specific federal judges. They described specific courtroom settings. They invented specific ultimatums with specific deadlines. They claimed marshals were waiting in court to make the arrest. They claimed hidden files were involved. They created a complete alternate reality with enough specific details to sound believable to anyone who wasn't checking the facts. And the names they used? Real judges. Actual federal judges who sit on actual benches and hear actual cases. Judges with established reputations and documented histories. By using real names, the video creators added a layer of credibility to their fictional scenarios. Because when people hear a name they recognize, when they hear the name of a real judge who actually exists, they're more likely to assume the story must be real. After all, why would someone make up a story about a real judge? That seems like the kind of thing that would get you in serious trouble. But that's exactly what happened. Real judges were placed into fictional scenarios. Real names were attached to fake events. And the result was a confusing mixture of truth and fiction that left many viewers unable to tell the difference. The specific claims in these videos are worth examining because they reveal just how elaborate the fiction has become. One video claims a specific judge issued an arrest threat with a specific deadline. Another video claims a different judge did essentially the same thing. The details change, but the pattern remains consistent. A judge confronts the FBI director. The judge demands some kind of compliance. The judge threatens immediate arrest if the demands aren't met. The FBI director freezes in fear. It's a compelling narrative. It's dramatic. It's emotionally charged. And it's completely made up. There's no court record of any of this happening. There's no documentation. There's no verified reporting from credible sources. There's nothing but videos with disclaimers buried in the fine print that say, hey, this is fictional, don't take it seriously. But nobody reads the fine print. Nobody pays attention to the disclaimers. They see the dramatic headline, they watch the shocking video, and they share it with everyone they know. And this is where the real damage happens. Because when millions of people believe a false narrative about judges threatening to arrest the FBI director, it changes how they view the legal system. It makes them believe the courts are completely political. It makes them believe judges are weaponized against the administration. It makes them believe the rule of law is breaking down. And all of those beliefs are based on lies. All of those beliefs are based on fabricated videos that explicitly admit they're fictional. But the emotional impact of the false story is so strong that it overrides the rational recognition that the story isn't real. People feel outrage. And that outrage makes them want to share the story with others. People feel concern, and that concern makes them want to warn their friends and family. People feel fear, and that fear makes them want to spread the word about what they believe is happening. The video creators understand this perfectly. They know that emotional content travels further than factual content. They know that shocking claims generate more engagement than boring, accurate information. They know that outrage drives clicks and shares and views. So they craft their videos specifically to trigger those emotional responses. They design their thumbnails to catch attention. They write their headlines to sound urgent and dramatic. They build their narratives to maximize emotional impact. And the algorithm rewards them with visibility and reach and revenue. But the cost of this is enormous. The cost is that millions of people are walking around with completely false information in their heads. The cost is that people's trust in democratic institutions is being eroded by lies. The cost is that political decisions are being made based on misinformation. The cost is that the public discourse is being poisoned by fiction masquerading as fact. And once this misinformation takes hold, It's incredibly difficult to correct. Even when the truth comes out, even when the real story is explained clearly and thoroughly, many people will still believe the false version. Because the false version was more exciting. The false version was more dramatic. The false version confirmed what they already suspected about the system being rigged. And confirmation bias is a powerful force. Once people have adopted a belief, even a false one, they tend to seek out information that confirms that belief and reject information that contradicts it. So even when presented with the truth, they may continue believing the lie. This is why it's so important to understand what actually happened in this case. This is why we need to separate the real events from the fictional narrative. The real events are significant. The FBI director announced a judge's arrest and then deleted the announcement. That's a real story that deserves investigation. Why was the arrest made? What were the obstruction allegations? Why did the director delete the announcement? Were there legal concerns? Were there political considerations? Was there pressure from higher ups? These are legitimate questions about a documented event. This is the kind of story that journalists should be pursuing. This is the kind of story that citizens should be paying attention to. But the fictional narrative has completely overshadowed the real story. People are so focused on the false claim about judges threatening to arrest the FBI director that they've completely missed the actual news about the FBI director announcing a judge's arrest. The real story is sitting right there, waiting to be examined. But nobody's looking at it because they're too distracted by the shiny, dramatic, fake story. Let's talk about how we can recognize this kind of misinformation when we see it. Because the ability to spot fake news is becoming increasingly essential in today's media environment. When you see a headline claiming a judge threatened to arrest a high-ranking official, your first reaction should be skepticism. That's not how the legal system works. Judges don't issue instant arrest threats in dramatic courtroom confrontations. There are procedures, there are processes, there are written orders and documented hearings. If a judge actually threatened to arrest the FBI director, there would be a paper trail. There would be court records. There would be official documentation. There would be multiple credible news outlets reporting on it. The absence of any of these things is a strong indication that the story is false. And that's exactly what we see in this case. No court records, no official documentation, no credible reporting, nothing but viral videos with fictional disclaimers. Another red flag is the inconsistency between different versions of the story. In one video, the threatening judge is one person. In another video, it's a different person. The details change from one version to the next. The names change. The deadlines change. The specific circumstances change. But the basic pattern remains the same. A judge threatens arrest. The FBI director freezes. Drama ensues. This inconsistency is a sign that the story is being made up. If this actually happened, it would have happened in one specific court with one specific judge. There wouldn't be multiple versions with different judges all claiming to have done essentially the same thing. The variations suggest that video creators are copying a fictional template and just changing the names to try to avoid obvious plagiarism. But the underlying pattern is the same because the story is entirely invented. And then there's the issue of what would happen if this event actually occurred. Think about it. If a federal judge threatened to arrest the sitting FBI director, it would be the biggest legal story in years. It would trigger immediate responses from the Department of Justice. It would generate congressional investigations. It would dominate cable news for days. But none of that happened. There was no DOJ response. There were no congressional hearings. There was no media frenzy. The story just existed in a handful of viral videos and nowhere else. The complete absence of any mainstream coverage is itself a strong indication that the event never occurred. Because if a judge had actually done this, you wouldn't be able to avoid the news about it. It would be everywhere. But it's not everywhere. It's only in the viral videos. And that's because the videos are making things up. This brings us to the broader lesson here. The lesson that applies not just to this story, but to every story you encounter online. The lesson is that you need to verify claims before you believe them. You need to check official sources. You need to look for credible reporting. You need to demand documentation. You need to be skeptical of dramatic claims that seem too shocking to be true, because often they are too shocking to be true. Often they're designed specifically to trigger an emotional response that overrides your critical thinking. The creators of this type of content know exactly what they're doing. They know that if they can make you feel outrage or fear or concern, you'll be much less likely to stop and fact check. You'll be much more likely to share the content with others. And that sharing is what generates their revenue. The more shares, the more views, the more money. Your emotional response is being monetized. Your outrage is being turned into their profit. This is why media literacy is so important. This is why you need to develop the skill of evaluating claims critically. This is why you need to be able to distinguish between real news and fictional content. And the good news is that this skill isn't difficult to learn. It just requires a few simple habits. When you see a dramatic claim, pause. Don't react immediately. Take a moment to think. Ask yourself if the claim makes sense. Ask yourself if it's consistent with how the world actually works. Ask yourself if there's any official documentation supporting the claim. Ask yourself if credible news outlets are reporting the same thing. If the answer to these questions is no, you should be very skeptical. You should probably assume the claim is false until proven otherwise. And here's something else to keep in mind. Real news is often less dramatic than fake news. Real events are usually more complicated and less sensational than the fictional versions. Fake news creators understand this. They know that the truth is often boring compared to the lies they can invent. So they invent more exciting stories, they create more dramatic narratives, they manufacture more shocking scenarios. And people share these fictional stories because they're more interesting than the truth. But the truth matters. The truth is what allows us to make informed decisions. The truth is what allows democracy to function. The truth is what allows us to hold our institutions accountable. When we abandon the truth in favor of entertaining fiction, we lose the ability to govern ourselves effectively. The Kash Patel story is a perfect example of this dynamic. The real story involves an FBI director making a significant announcement and then deleting it. That's interesting. That's newsworthy. That's worth examining. But it's not as exciting as a judge threatening to arrest the FBI director. So the fake story took over. The fake story went viral. The fake story became what millions of people believe happened. And the real story got buried under the avalanche of misinformation. This is how the internet works now. This is how false narratives spread. This is how the truth gets lost in the noise. But it doesn't have to be that way. You can choose to be part of the solution rather than part of the problem. You can choose to verify claims before sharing them. You can choose to demand evidence before believing dramatic stories. You can choose to be a critical consumer of information rather than a passive recipient. Remember the key facts here. The FBI director announced a judge's arrest on social media. Then he deleted the announcement. That's what really happened. No judge threatened to arrest him. No courtroom confrontation occurred. No federal judge issued any arrest threat. Those are the facts. Those are the verified, documented, confirmed facts. Everything else is fiction. Everything else is fabricated content designed to generate views and shares. The fake videos explicitly acknowledge this in their disclaimers. They admit they're fictional. They admit they're not representing real events. But people don't read the disclaimers. People don't pay attention to the fine print. They see the dramatic headline and they assume it must be real. And that's how misinformation spreads. That's how millions of people end up believing things that are completely false. The next time you see a video with a dramatic headline about a judge threatening to arrest someone, stop and think. Ask yourself if this makes sense. Ask yourself where the documentation is. Ask yourself why credible news outlets aren't reporting it. Ask yourself if the video includes a disclaimer admitting it's fictional. When you ask these questions, you'll be able to see through the lies. You'll be able to recognize the misinformation for what it is. You'll be able to protect yourself from being fooled. And you'll be able to prevent the spread of false information to others. That's how we fight back against the tide of misinformation. That's how we restore trust in our institutions. That's how we strengthen our democracy. One verified claim at a time, one skeptical question at a time, one refusal to share unverified content at a time. The Patel story's real lesson is about how misinformation spreads and how to resist it, verify before sharing, and value truth over excitement. When we apply that skepticism, we become harder to fool and better participants in democracy. That's worth working toward.